Shuyi is a financial reporter well known in her field. Recently, she found out that her boyfriend cheated on her, and honestly, it hurts. He's been apologizing, saying things like, he's truly sorry, and even mentioned that the girl he cheated with comes from a fancy family. He goes on about the girl's uncle driving a fancy Rolls-Royce with a custom license plate, trying to impress Shuyi or something. Then he suggests that they should just break up and be friends instead. Seriously? Who would want to be friends with someone who betrays them? So, she tells him to get lost. It doesn't matter if that girl has a nice family or if her uncle has a luxury car. Shuyi refuses to let them get away with this. She wants to give them a taste of their own medicine. One day, she intends to make them both show some respect by calling her auntie. Then, out of the blue, a Rolls-Royce pulls up next to her. She sees her chance and leans toward the driver's window, trying to appear casual. She tells the guy inside that her phone's totally dead and asks him if he would mind giving her a ride. As she speaks, she casually tucks some strands of hair behind her ears, trying to look cute or whatever. The man looks at her with a puzzled expression and replies that he doesn't give rides to women who have boyfriends. It takes her a moment, but she suddenly recognizes him. It turns out he's the same rich guy she turned down in the past. What a crazy little twist of fate. In another bizarre twist, Shuyi happens to find out who the rich guy really is, and she don't hesitate to use the opportunity to her advantage. She decides she'll interview his company and achieve her goal of becoming an auntie to her ex-boyfriend. She pastes a sweet smile on her face and asks the rich guy if he's ready for her. A Gap Mo CEO and a dramatic beauty. A hilariously sweet office romance is about to begin. Let's take it to the beginning. It's a busy day, and Shuyi is focused on her work when her phone rings. She answers, and the caller Chen Cheng introduces himself as the assistant to the director of Mingyu Bank. Chen mentions that a month ago, an interview was set up between Shuyi's magazine and his boss, director Shi Yang. Unfortunately, due to personal reasons, they will need to push the interview back a week. Shuyi screams inwardly because interviews are based off timing, and a week later would be too late. But she tells Chen that she's deeply sorry and pleads for a way to keep the interview on schedule. She asks if she can be squeezed into director Shi Yang's schedule somehow tonight. Then she adds that a phone interview is also possible. Chen says the director has an important dinner, but suggests he could find a place for Shuyi to wait. Furthermore, he warns that he can't guarantee that Shi Yang will have time, and Shuyi might end up coming for nothing. Still, Shuyi insists on coming, and once the call is over, she slumps down on her desk in frustration. She wonders who this Shi Yang really is. At just 27, he succeeded turning around his family's struggling business, making a name for himself in finance. Just the name Shi Yang grabs attention, and she knows that interviewing him would be a big deal, especially since he's somewhat of a mystery. Her coworker comes over to ask about the call, also asking if she would still be celebrating her boyfriend's birthday later at night. Shuyi replies that she can't celebrate with him because she has to interview Shi Yang. She makes it known that she chooses her job over her boyfriend for tonight. As if on cue, her boyfriend calls, asking when she'll be done with work so he can pick her up. She lets him know about her important interview and tells him that she can't make it tonight. He says it's okay since it's for work and that he'll just hang out with a friend instead. Shuyi apologizes, saying she's not feeling well and can't catch a movie afterward either. Her boyfriend reassures her that they can celebrate his birthday next year, since it's just a birthday. Then he tells her good luck with work before hanging up. Feeling a bit down, Shuyi pouts at her phone. Her colleague observes that life isn't easy, and on second thought, she mentions that Shuyi's boyfriend is pretty understanding, considering that they just started dating. She adds that if it were her boyfriend, he'd be upset if she stood him up during their honeymoon phase, no matter the reason. Shuyi wonders if her boyfriend really is too understanding. He didn't even ask about her when she said she wasn't feeling well. He just hurriedly hung up. She slaps her face lightly to shake off the overthinking. Since she's chosen work over her boyfriend tonight, she decides to focus and do an impressive job on the interview. As dusk falls, she heads out for her meeting with director Shi Yang. When she gets to the address, she sits patiently waiting to see Xiyang. After more than 2 hours have passed, she starts to worry about being unable to interview him today. She silently hopes for a chance. While she's in the waiting room, a man walks by and notices her. He's the second in command at the company, Mingyu Bank, and also Xiyang's brother-in-law. He recognizes Shuyi and attempts to call out to her, but just then her phone rings. It's Assistant Chen, who tells her that the dinner is over. He goes ahead to inform her that Xiyang is still busy and would be unable to see her. She feels disappointed but says she understands. She gets up and heads outside, mingling with the crowd of guests. Not only that, but she happens to recognize a couple of faces because she has interviewed most of them. Likewise, she hopefully wishes for an opportunity to bump into Xiyang. A tipsy guy spots her and asks if she's alone, offering her a ride home. Shuyi laughs nervously, saying it's fine because her boyfriend is on his way. But the man insists that it's pouring rain and getting a taxi will be tough. The second in command from earlier sees Shuyi again. He tells Xiyang that Shuyi has interviewed him before and that she's a nice person. He mentions he heard Assistant Chen say Shuyi waited all night and it must be hard for her. So, he suggests Xiyang give Shuyi a ride home. Meanwhile, Shuyi stands by the curb, frustrated because she can't find a picture of Xiyang online. She wonders if he's trying to keep his appearance a secret and if anybody knows what he actually looks like. Just then, a Rolls-Royce pulls up and a man gets out to open the door for her. Xiyang steps out and offers her a ride. Shuyi is curious about why all the silver spoons seem so relaxed these days. She appreciates Xiyang's kind offer, but decides to say no. When she does, he looks surprised and raises his eyebrows. Shuyi explains that her boyfriend is on his way to pick her up. After hearing this, Xiyang just walks away without saying anything else. What Shuyi doesn't know is that Xiyang is actually the man she has really wanted to interview for a long time. Xingzhou finally pulls up, and Shuyi hops into the car. He quickly says he's sorry for being late. He explains that it's his first time in the area, so he got turned around and missed a few exits, which made him drive around in circles. Shuyi smiles and assures him it's no big deal, especially since it's pouring outside. Then she asks him how he celebrated his birthday and if he had a good time. He hesitates a bit, stuttering over his words, which makes Shuyi curious. She interrupts him, asking him if it was with Xu Feng. Xingzhou quickly gets his composure back, and he hurriedly agrees with her that he spent his birthday with Xu Feng. He compliments her for knowing him so well, and he asks her how she figured it out so fast. However, Shuyi leans close to sniff him. She says she's surprised that an uptight straight guy like Xu Feng has started using perfume. She asks if Xu Feng has gotten a girlfriend, and Xingzhou pushes her violently. He tells her to back off because he's driving. Then he ruffles her hair, telling her to be good. Shuyi gets lost in thoughts. She wonders why her boyfriend has been ruffling her hair a lot lately. After getting home, she freshens up and puts on her pajamas. She wonders if Xingzhou is back home, so she decides to call him before going to bed. However, she can't find her phone. She remembers using it before leaving Warner's Manor, so she knows it wasn't stolen. She thinks she might have left it in her boyfriend's car, so she grabs her iPad to check the location of her phone. It shows that her phone is at Jiang City First Citizens Hospital. Shuyi is surprised that her phone is at a hospital. She wonders why it is there and looks out her window to see the heavy rain. She knows it's late, but she feels anxious about what might have happened. Despite this, she decides to brave it in the storm. At Jiang City First Citizens Hospital, Shuyi sees Xingzhou's car and feels a wave of surprise wash over her when she realizes it's really there. She starts to wonder what he could possibly be doing at the hospital so late at night. Just then, she spots him walking out while holding an umbrella, and she opens her mouth to call out to him. But then, she notices another woman standing very close to him, almost clinging to him. Shuyi freezes in the shadows, her heart racing as she watches the scene unfold. Inside her mind, she screams for her boyfriend to push the woman away, to reject her touch. Instead of doing what Shuyi hopes, the woman holds on to him even tighter, and to Suyi's dismay, Xingzhou pulls the woman closer to him. Suddenly, she starts to remember all of her negative thoughts. She thinks about how Xingzhou quickly accepted her decision not to celebrate his birthday with him and just hung up the phone. She recalls her coworker saying that her boyfriend is too understanding, especially since they only just started dating. Furthermore, she also remembers the moment earlier when she caught a whiff of a perfume on him in the car. These memories make her feel like she hasn't been imagining things after all, and the strange woman clings tighter to Xingzhou. Shuyi looks down at the bracelet on her wrist, and suddenly memories flood her mind, and she has a flashback. Xingzhou is kneeling in front of her, holding a beautiful bouquet of flowers. A crowd gathers around them, curious and excited. With a bright smile, Xingzhou declares his love for her, telling her that he is committed. Then, with great care, he slips a promise bracelet around her wrist as a symbol of his dedication. Afterward, he announces that he has spent the last 3 years chasing after Shuyi. So he promises that he will spend the rest of his life making her happy. But now, in reality, she sees him sharing a kiss with a strange woman, and she decides she's had enough. Feeling overwhelmed, she takes the promise bracelet off her wrist and loops it around a door handle, leaving it behind as she steps away. At the moment, everything seems weirdly funny to her. Hours later, Shuyi is going through some of her photos with Xingzhou when her doorbell rings. She goes to open the door and speak of the devil. Xingzhou is standing outside holding the promised bracelet. The next morning, Shuyi arrives at work and goes into the editor-in-chief's office. Without looking up, the woman tells her that Mingyu Bank has rescheduled their interview for next Thursday at 10 p.m. She says they need to change one of the questions and asks Shuyi to send an updated version of the interview guide as soon as she can. When she looks at Shuyi, she sees that she looks like a hot mess. She asks what happened to her. Before Shuyi can answer, the other woman interrupts and asks if it's because she is still upset about missing the chance to see director Shi Yan. Shuyi replies that it's not that. She broke up with her boyfriend last night. She has a flashback of the horrors from the previous night. Xingzhou is holding the promise bracelet. He tells her that the other lady's family is impressive, and her uncle drives a Rolls-Royce with a special license plate. It's the only one in Jiang City, so they must be rich and powerful. He explains that he feels stuck because he needs his career to go well, especially since he can't afford a house, no matter how hard he works. He continues, saying he used to love Shuyi a lot and wanted to be with her forever. But now he thinks it's better to just be friends. She turns around, grabs a bag, and throws it at him. She asks who would want to be friends with him and tells him to get lost. Presently, the editor-in-chief says it's strange because she always thought Shuyi's boyfriend wasn't good enough for her. She sees Shuyi as a valuable person and feels it required significant effort to help her reach this point. Furthermore, she tells Shuyi that with her skills and achievements, she can have any man she wants, but Shuyi still seems sad. At that moment, she wonders what kind of man she should be looking for and remembers what Xingzhou told her last night. Likewise, she's thinking about whether she should go after a man who drives a Rolls-Royce, and she shares her thoughts out loud. The director-in-chief is totally on board with the idea. She tells Shuyi that she's got what it takes and is ready to put in the effort, which means she has a lot of potential. So, what's wrong with aiming for a man with a fancy car like a Rolls-Royce? But then she reminds Shuyi that her personal life shouldn't mix with her work. She advises her to get her feelings sorted out and make sure she's ready for the big summit meeting at the financial center. Shuyi grabs her coat and steps outside, checking her phone for the location of the meeting place. She grumbles to herself that if there were any other coffee shops nearby, she wouldn't even bother coming here. As she walks, she accidentally bumps into Xingzhou and that strange woman she met last night. They freeze for a moment, staring at each other, and Shuyi can't help but feel a bit unlucky. After just breaking up with Xingzhou, he's already parading around with another woman. Xingzhou looks at the woman and suggests they should come back another time. But the woman shakes her head and pouts, insisting she really needs to get her daily fix of hot coffee from this shop. She claims she'll feel sick if she doesn't have it every day. Shuyi spots a bracelet on the other woman's wrist. It's the same promise bracelet she had given back to Xingzhou just yesterday. Feeling a wave of disgust, she looks away, concluding that horrible people would remain the same no matter what. As she walks past the garbage can, she tosses her coffee cup inside, muttering that some people just love secondhand things. Shuyi is really frustrated and gives a street lamp a kick, trying to calm down in her head. She keeps telling herself that Xingzhou and his new girlfriend aren't worth getting upset over. At the same time, Xingzhou is helping his new girlfriend into the car. She tells him it's okay if Shuyi wants to yell at her, but she just doesn't understand why Shuyi would yell at him. Xingzhou reassures her that it's fine, suggesting they just won't go back to that coffee shop anymore. His girlfriend comments that it's been quite a surprise for her to see how prickly Shuyi can be. She adds that she can't imagine everything Xingzhou had to deal with from Shuyi all those years. It's a real eye-opener for her. While this is happening, Shuyi keeps telling herself to stay calm. She acts like she can't see or hear anything and turns her head away. Meanwhile, Xingzhou and his new girlfriend make a plan to keep their distance from Shuyi, thinking that the farther they are, the better it will be for them. Shuyi spots a Rolls-Royce, the only one in all of Jiang City, and her face lights up because an idea suddenly hits her. She starts walking toward the car, realizing that some people just won't see you as wild and free unless you're willing to make sacrifices. If you don't, they'll just think you're stupid. She thinks to herself that even if she can't make Xingzhou and his new girlfriend pay for the things they've done, she'll make sure they have no choice but to respectfully call her auntie. And in the end, she's going to shake things up in their family, turning their world upside down. She reaches the car and leans on the back window, giving it a polite knock. There's no reply at first, and she starts to wonder if anyone is even in the passenger seat. Just then, the window rolls down slowly, and she sees a familiar face. It's the silver spoon she had turned down the night before because Xingzhou was coming to pick her up. It's kind of ironic that she still doesn't know who he is. Realizing how awkward the situation has become, Shuyi offers a nervous smile and tucks some strands of hair behind her ear, trying to seem flirty. She tells Shi Yang that her phone is dead, so she can't call a taxi, and asks if she can borrow his phone for a quick call. However, he just sits there, staring straight ahead and ignoring her completely. Inside, Shuyi is confused because she's sure he has at least some interest in her, especially since he was the one who approached her the night before. Determined not to give up, she decides to give it another shot. She tells him that if he's willing to give her a ride, she'd be totally fine with that, and Shi Yang finally looks up. He notifies her that he doesn't give rides to women who have boyfriends, and before she can respond, the car reverses and zooms off. And just like that, her chances of getting revenge disappears alongside the speeding Rolls-Royce. Shuyi comes back to her office, feeling a bit upset as she works. She's lost in her thoughts about the man who talked to her last night. It turns out he is that woman's little uncle. And today he seemed to hold a grudge and rejected her attempts to connect with him. The entire situation makes her feel embarrassed all over again. To cope with her feelings, she decides to concentrate on her work. She thinks that if her love life isn't going well, at least her professional life should be successful. Shuyi arrives for her next appointment with director Shi Yang, determined that this time her interview will go well. When she gets to the company, she signs in at the front desk and notices a name on the list: Xu Yuling. The name seems oddly familiar, and she realizes it is indeed the same person. Xu Yuling works at her company, and they do not get along at all. Ever since she got hired, the woman has been at odds with her. She recalls that in the past 2 years, the woman has snatched several of her interview opportunities, leaving her frustrated and annoyed. Suddenly, Shuyi feels a wave of anxiety wash over her. She worries that Xu Yuling might steal this interview from her, just like before. Rushing to the elevator, she spots Secretary Chen and informs him that she has an appointment with the director at 3:30 in the afternoon for the interview. Secretary Chen looks a bit uncomfortable as he replies to her. He asks if she didn't get something else, and Shuyi looks at him confused. He then tells her that earlier in the morning, another colleague had come in to conduct the interview. As it turns out, the director was available at that time. Hearing this, Suyi's heart sinks, and she realizes that Shu Yuling has come to stir up trouble again. As her heart breaks, she apologizes to Secretary Chen, explaining that there must have been a mix-up within her team about the appointment. Secretary Chen nods, seeming to understand her situation, and expresses his sympathy for the trouble she is experiencing. Suyi replies that it's all right, but inside it hurts like hell. As she turns to walk away, she spots a man coming out of a room. It's Silver Spoon, aka Little Uncle. Before she can fully grasp what he's doing there, Secretary Chen looks in his direction and calls him Director Shi. Suddenly, it hits Suyi. Silver Spoon, aka Little Uncle, is actually Director Shi Yang. Inside her head, she can't help but scream. The nameless Silver Spoon and that woman's uncle turns out to be the famous financial mogul, Shi Yan. Could the day get any worse? When Shi Yang catches sight of her, she smiles nervously, preparing to speak, but he walks right past her like he hadn't seen her, and she freezes. In disbelief, she wonders if he's really going to just walk away, acting like nothing happened. She thinks about Shu Yuling snatching the interview from her, and she thinks about Xingzhou dumping her for another woman. Suyi decides she has failed enough in life, and she would not let Director Shi Yan get away this time around. She wants the interview with him and also the auntie title. So she turns around and calls out to him. She tells him that the appointment that was made for an interview this afternoon is one she has been eagerly awaiting so long, and the day has finally arrived. Secretary Chen looks at her in disbelief. He asks her if he has short-term memory. But Suyi smiles sweetly. She asks Director Shi Yan if he thinks he could find some time right now. Shi Yang turns around to take a look at her, and Suyi pastes a smile on her face, but she clenches her fists nervously. She walks closer to him and comes to a standstill, pleading with him for just a bit of his time and asking if it would be all right. He regards her for a moment, then he turns away, and Suyi looks down in defeat, knowing she has failed. As the elevator door chimes and opens, Shi Yang invites her to step inside with him, and she feels an overwhelming sense of joy. Finally, after all the stress she has been through, it feels like it's all worth it. She realizes that there are still kind-hearted people in the world. Shi Yang presses the button for the second floor, and Suyi watches in confusion. Curious, she starts to ask him where they are going. But Secretary Chen interrupts by telling her to keep quiet because Shi Yang is answering a call. He picks up his ringing phone and stares at it for a moment before deciding to decline the call. Shortly after, Secretary Chen's phone starts ringing as well. As soon as he answers, the screaming voice of a woman fills the elevator. The voice tells Secretary Chen to ask her uncle to pick up his phone. Suyi recognizes the voice right away. It belongs to Xingzhou's new girlfriend. Director Shi Yang turns around and tells his secretary to pass a message along to his niece. The message is simple but firm. If she misbehaves at home, he would rather not see her. Chen relays the message, and Suyi thinks that things may not be as bad as she thought after all. Although Shi Yang is very fond of his niece, he is also a strict uncle who means what he says, and his words carry weight in the household. All the better for Suyi, as she realizes that she might be able to use it to her advantage in intimidating his niece. She feels a spark of mischief growing inside her, like an invincible demon with 2 red horns, as she plans her revenge on Xingzhou's new girlfriend. The elevator doors slide open, and they step out into a parking lot. Shi Yang tells her that he has a long drive ahead, so they can chat in the car. She nods in agreement, and they both get inside the vehicle. As she settles in, Suyi feels proud of herself. She thinks that her behavior and expressions have been very professional throughout their meeting. While she gazes out the window, Shi Yang turns to her and asks if she is feeling cold. She suddenly feels a wave of nervousness, breaking into a light sweat. She wonders to herself if it's appropriate for him to ask such a question. Likewise, she concludes that he must be very considerate and observant. Taking this into account, she decides to make her move while the opportunity is good, so she positions herself in a way that shows off her best angle. Then she responds to him, saying that she is fine, she isn't cold. With her answer, Shi Yang feels that it's all right to open the windows. Soon after, a chilly breeze comes rushing into the back seat of the car, tussling Suyi's hair all around her face. She feels a shiver run through her. And she resentfully thinks to herself that just because she told him she's not cold doesn't really mean she is hot. Despite her raging feelings, Shuyi puts on a brave face and pretends that everything is okay. She takes a moment to gather herself and pulls her messy hair back into a ponytail with a hairband. Thereafter, she reaches for her recorder and asks director Shi Yang if she can begin recording now. He just stays seated, staring straight ahead, without answering her. Shuyi tries to keep smiling, even though it's a little painful for her. She tells him that she plans to record the entire process of the interview and assures him that once they have a final draft, she will show it to him for his input. But Shi Yang remains silent, still looking straight ahead without making any acknowledgement. Taking a deep breath, she notifies him that she will start the interview now, attempting to keep her spirits up despite the awkward atmosphere. Shuyi begins the interview by introducing the main topic and then asks the first question. Shi Yang pauses for a moment, getting lost in his thoughts as he remembers his previous interview with Xu Yuling. She had started her interview in exactly the same way, with the same topic and the same first question that Shuyi is asking now. It makes him wonder if both of them are using the same script for their interviews. An oblivious Shuyi watches him with anticipation, hoping to hear any thoughts or insights he might have. She studies his face, wondering if he will blink or respond. As the silence stretches on, a sense of heat rises within her. She wonders if he has an ulterior motive when she catches the weird expression on his face. Suddenly, Shi Yang begins to speak. He answers her first question, and she follows up by asking him another one. This back and forth continues for a while, with him responding to her questions and her asking more. After 2 hours, Shuyi realizes that a lot of time has gone by. She feels tired because keeping up with Shi Yang had taken a lot of focus and attention without any breaks. She decides to take a brief look at him and carefully observes his face, noting every feature, especially his fluttering eyelashes. Likewise, she thinks he has a strange temper, but she can't help but notice that he looks really. Before she can finish that thought, he glances at her with a quick side-eye and asks if the interview is done. Realizing he has caught her staring, she quickly turns away, scrambling to think of an excuse for her lingering gaze. Trust her to come up with a reply like, "I'm done looking? Seriously? Done looking?" Even Shi Yang gives her a disappointed look, and that's when she realizes how creepy she must have sounded when she accidentally let that slip. Embarrassed, she quickly covers her face with her iPad to hide her blush. Just then, the driver speaks up, letting Shi Yang know they've arrived at their destination. Shuyi lets out a sigh of relief, feeling as if the driver has rescued her from having to explain what she just said. Shi Yang steps out of the vehicle and tells her it has been 2 hours. He then says she can leave now. When she finally comes out and takes in the surrounding, she is completely disoriented. How's she supposed to leave when they are in the middle of nowhere? By riding a horse? She watches in disbelief as Shi Yang walks away without a backward glance, and she quickly hurries after him. She catches up and says she has one more question, though it's one that is a little off topic. Shi Yang tells her to go ahead. She clearly lets him know that it's trivial gossip and not significant, just a question that people on the internet talk about a lot. She takes a deep breath and asks him if he has a girlfriend. Shi Yang halts in his tracks and turns around. He looks down at Shuyi with a chilling stare, and she gazes back up at him, anticipating his response. Just as he is about to speak, a man's voice breaks the moment, calling out to Shi Yang. The man asks if he has just gotten here. Curious, Shuyi takes a peek to see the newcomer that has interrupted them. She recognizes him as Guanxiang Cheng, a well-known leader in the financial industry, admired by many and considered a role model. She has only ever seen him in news articles before. Quickly, she introduces herself as Zheng Shuyi, a reporter for the weekly finance magazine. Mr. Guan appears to recognize her name and the magazine she works for. He mentions that he has read a few of her articles and praises her for her thorough and impressive work. He adds that he never imagined the writer would be a young woman. She smiles back at him and playfully responds that he is being too kind. Guan turns to Shi Yang and says he didn't know he was going to have guests, so he didn't prepare anything. He adds that girls hardly ever visit his old, rundown place. The fact that Shi Yang has brought a girl along makes Mr. Guan wonder if that means something more. Before he can finish his thought, Shi Yang gives him a sharp glare to show he disapproves of where the conversation is going, and he quickly drops the topic. Meanwhile, Sui looks away, feeling a bit shy, but secretly pleased that Mr. Guan thinks she is Shi Yang's girlfriend. As they slowly walk into the property, she notices how beautiful everything looks around her. She tells Mr. Guan that he does a wonderful job taking care of the place. Spotting some horses nearby, she thinks they are really lovely. Mr. Guan then tells her that the best horses are kept inside, and her eyes light up with excitement at the idea of seeing more of them. Meanwhile, Shi Yang looks away without participating in the conversation and keeping a bored expression on his face. Mr. Guan notices Sui's excitement and mentions to her that he can show her more horses, and this makes her even happier. Shi Yang excuses himself, saying he is stepping away to change his clothes. He warns Sui not to cause any trouble, and she feels relieved that he isn't asking her to leave. She promises that she will wait patiently for him. As Shi Yang walks away, Mr. Guan remarks that he and Sui seem like they have known each other for a long time. She responds, explaining that they have only just met recently. The conversation goes back to horses, and Mr. Guan encourages Sui to give horse riding a try. She is surprised and a little shocked by the suggestion, so she asks if it's really okay for her to try riding a horse. He responds that it is absolutely fine, she should go for it. He mentions that there is an old riding outfit that belonged to his wife in the changing room. If she doesn't mind, she can wear it. Excited by the idea, Sui eagerly accepts the offer. Mr. Guan leads her to the changing room, and as they walk, she feels a thrill of anticipation because she's never ridden a horse before. When she walks past a stall, she notices Shi Yang staring at her with a cold gaze. Feeling uneasy, she hurries past him and quickly changes into the outfit that Mr. Guan has given her. The clothes fit her nicely, but she struggles a bit with putting on the belt, which is taking longer than she expected. Suddenly, she hears footsteps and realizes that Shi Yang has already finished changing. A spark of excitement lights up her eyes, and she calls out to him, asking for his help with the belt. She hears him walking up to her door, and she waits in excitement, twirling her hair in her fingers. When he gets close enough, he stops and tells her that if she doesn't know how to put on the belt, then she shouldn't ride the horse. It seems like Sui finally figures out how to place the belt because she comes out fully dressed and ready for the task at hand. From her earlier conversation with Mr. Guan, she got to discover that he isn't related to Shi Yang, but rather he was friends with Shi Yang's father. The fact that Shi Yang makes time to visit Guan shows just how important he is to him. Rather than affection, they show a deep respect for each other, and Shi Yang only wants to show his best side to Guan. And that's why there's no way he will reject her this time around. Mr. Guan brings a horse forward, and he tells Sui that the horse has the mildest personality. Afterward, he urges Shi Yang to teach her how to ride. Sui smiles nervously at Shi Yang, but he doesn't say a word. She thinks his expression looks scary as she climbs onto the horse. She muses that he can't do her any harm. It's not like he'd feed her to the horse, right? She turns around to talk to him, wanting to ask for some tips. But before she can finish her sentence, he hops onto the horse behind her. She freezes in surprise, feeling her cheeks flush pink from the closeness of their bodies. Xinyang looks at her and asks what's wrong. She quickly replies that it's nothing, just that she feels a little nervous because it's her first time riding a horse. Inside, she thinks about how unexpectedly warm he is. As Mr. Guan waves them from his own horse, Xinyang takes hold of the reins and gallops away. He moves at a very fast pace, and it makes Sui dizzy. She tries to ask him to slow down, but he begins jumping hurdles with the horse. It frightens her, and she begins to scream, begging him to slow down. At this point, she's close to tears. At last, he brings the horse to a halt, and Sui leans forward, overwhelmed by dizziness and nausea. She reminds herself that after witnessing Shi Yang's true nature, she knows she can never forgive him, regardless of what happens in the future. With a touch of sarcasm, he asks her if she really still wants to learn, and inside her mind, she screams in frustration. As the sun sets, the Rolls-Royce comes to a stop in front of Shuyi's apartment building. She feels tired and weary from the day, and she glances to her side, remembering that Shi Yang has already left. She steps out of the car and starts to walk toward her building. Suddenly, she notices that one of her earrings is missing. Realizing she probably left it in the car, she turns around to go back and retrieve it. But to her surprise, the car is already driving away quickly. She pauses for a moment, considering what to do. Then she decides to let it go, since the earring only cost her 50 yuan. At work the next day, her coworker Nan is buzzing with excitement as she approaches. She asks why Shuyi hasn't checked her phone or replied to her texts, saying that something big has happened. Shuyi apologizes to Nan and explains that she was busy trying to finish her reports and couldn't look at her messages. Curious, she asks what the big news is. Nan tells her that Xu Yuling had also gone to interview director Shi Yang the previous day, and Shuyi pretends like it's news to her. Nan continues to speak to her. She reveals that while she was in the editor-in-chief's office, she took a peek at Xu Yuling's report and discovered that the woman had plagiarized Suyi's outline. Every single question was the same as hers. To Suyi's shock, she suddenly understands why Shi Yang was giving her that strange look during their interview. The discovery makes her feel very upset. She believes that as long as the results are good, her boss is not concerned about office politics. She'll go along with the best report, regardless of who wrote it. This realization makes Shuyi even angrier because she believes that both the interview and the report truly belong to her. She decides that she will not allow someone else try to take credit for it by publishing it under their name. Instead, she resolves to confront the editor-in-chief directly to discuss her feelings about the situation. Suddenly, the pain in her thighs becomes worse, and it momentarily stops her raging. She remembers her ordeal and how painful riding horses turned out to be. Anger wells up inside her as she feels frustrated, and she starts to blame everything on Shi Yang, the ache in her body and her snatched report. Sometime later, we see Xu Yuling throwing a tantrum in the women's restroom. Shuyi is in a stall, and she overheard everything as Xu Yuling screams about how the boss has been giving most of her work to Shuyi ever since she joined the finance department. She feels frustrated because she interviewed Shi Yang, but it seems like Shuyi got much more information from him. She believes that if her report is compared with Suyi's report, it appears as if Shi Yang didn't take her questions seriously. Eventually, she accuses Shuyi of putting a spell on him. Just at that moment, Shuyi walks out and interrupts the other woman's ranting by stating that she hasn't put anyone under a spell. Completely taken by surprise, Xu Yuling's phone falls from her hand and clatters to the ground, but Shuyi pretends not to notice as she continues to speak with her. She tells the other woman that she is simply more skilled and that the director just happened to recognize that. Inside, she feels a surge of anger at Xu Yuling for acting like a victim. However, on the outside, she maintains a bright smile, even though she is still frustrated with the other woman for taking her interview and outline. However, she's satisfied that she got the upper hand because their boss ultimately chooses her report instead. Reeling from the joy of her small victory, her waist and legs don't seem to ache as much anymore. Later on, Shuyi sits in a taxi with Nan, who is excited that Shuyi got the feature story. Despite Xu Yuling's attempt to copy her outline, she couldn't outdo Shuyi. Nan proceeds to ask for the details of what happened with Xu Yuling after everything that went down. Shuyi shrugs it off, telling Nan that it's best to leave the past behind. She adds that, regardless of what happens, shameless people will always be shameless. Just then, the taxi comes to a stop, arriving at their destination. Shuyi is starting to get out of the car, but then she quickly gets back in. Nan notices her rush and asks why she jumped back inside. She looks out the window and sees Xingzhou standing outside. She excitedly turns to ask Shuyi if that isn't her boyfriend, but Shuyi doesn't respond right away. After a moment, she tells Nan that they have broken up. Nan suddenly puts the pieces together and realizes that Xingzhou not only ended things with Shuyi, but also cheated on her. Shuyi is surprised and asks how the other woman could have figured that out. Nan explains that she remembers when Xingzhou used to drive a Honda, but now he's in a fancy Benz. She tells Shuyi to give her some credit because she's a reporter, and she pays attention to details like this. She explains that she figured that Xingzhou must have gotten involved with a wealthy woman. As Nan notices Suyi's sad expression, she tries to comfort her by saying that the car Xingzhou has is just a C-class Benz. She reassures Shuyi that it's not really a big upgrade and that they could probably buy one too if they put in some hard work. This makes Shuyi think back to her memories of Xiyang. She starts to wonder if his niece isn't as special as she acts. It seems to her that Xiyang doesn't spoil her with money, which makes Shuyi suspect that he might actually be quite stingy. Elsewhere, we see Xiyang in his Rolls-Royce. He sees an earring and picks it up to inspect it. Just then, his assistant informs him that a call has come in from reporter Zheng Shuyi, who claims that she left an item in the car. Secretary Chen passes the phone to Xiyang so he can talk to Shuyi. She explains that she might have accidentally left her earring in his car and asks if he has seen it. She describes the earring as a pearl. Xiyang holds the earring in his hand and tells her that he hasn't seen it. However, Shuyi insists that he needs to check again because the earring means a lot to her. Xiyang asks what makes it so important, and she informs him that it is her family heirloom. This earring is especially significant because she is supposed to wear it on her wedding day as part of her dowry. Whenever she looks at it, she remembers her grandmother, who she hasn't seen in many years. Suyi's voice trembles, and she begins to fake cry. Xiyang smiles gently and tells Shuyi that he has found it. On the other end of the phone, she jumps up with joy because everything in her plan is going well so far. However, just before the call ends, Xiyang adds a sarcastic twist by saying that her dowry is made of plastic. Later on, we see Shuyi heading out. Earlier, she told Xiyang that she didn't want to be a burden by asking him to bring her the earring. Instead, she asked for his address so she could pick it up herself. However, the address he gave her seems unusual, and she believes that no one else would live there except for him. Feeling excited, she walks confidently, pleased that her plan to become a charming little auntie is starting to take shape. She walks up to the front door and tries to say hello, but it unexpectedly swings open. She is taken aback to find out that it is an automatic door, and she steps inside. As she enters, she looks around, puzzled about why it feels so dark and silent. Finally, she makes her way to the living room. There, by the balcony, she sees Xiyang seated casually. His silhouette stands out against the dim sky as evening begins to settle in. She takes a moment to observe him closely, noting his features from head to toe and appreciating his beauty. He notices her and points to her earring on a table. She feels happy that he has kept it safe for her. She quickly walks over to the table where he is pointing and finds the earring. While holding the earring, she tries to come up with a reason to stay with him for a little longer. Her eyes catch a vinyl record of a song by her favorite artist. She thinks about how much she admires this artist, even though they are very well known and famous. As she looks at the record, she wonders if Xiyang would even like that type of music, since he doesn't seem like the kind of person who enjoys popular hits. Anyway, she decides to ask him if he likes the artist. Then, she tells him that she is a big fan of that artist and that she owns the same vinyl records in her collection. Curious, she asks him which song by the artist is his favorite. As she waits for a reply, her eyes wander, and she notices a woman's purse sitting on the couch. She thinks to herself that it looks like the kind of purse a young lady would carry. Her mind races with thoughts that Xiyang has a girlfriend, and she fears that she might get ripped to shreds by another woman. Feeling anxious, she quickly bows and tells Xiyang that now that she has her earring back, she will leave him alone. She thanks him for taking care of it and says it's time for her to go. He looks at her, surprised by her sudden change in attitude, and asks her why she is leaving so soon. Shuyi looks around nervously and says that it's getting late. She would rather not be a bother because she still has reports to write, so she has to leave. As she turns to walk away, she suddenly stops. She realizes she just assumed that Xiyang has a girlfriend. She thinks about her plans and feels frustrated about maybe giving up on them just based on an assumption. Before she decides to give up entirely, She tells herself that she should check with him first to find out the truth. She returns to the room, and she tells him that she had a minor inconvenience on her way there. She asks him if it would be possible to borrow something from his girlfriend, and he looks at her confused. Girlfriend? Furthermore, she mentions to him that the person who was in the room earlier, and asks him if that wasn't his girlfriend. He follows her line of sight to the handbag on the couch, and he smirks. He tells her no, and she responds by saying that it's good to hear. Suddenly, he looks at her with curiosity. He asks her how it's good, and she starts to stammer and mumble her words. She explains that it's better to avoid any misunderstandings. He questions her, asking misunderstandings about what. As he takes a step closer, she instinctively takes a step back, feeling increasingly nervous. Her thoughts race, and she struggles to find the right words to say in response. Finally, standing face to face with her, he asks, "What about my niece? What do you think she might misunderstand?" Shuyi pauses suddenly. His niece? She realizes that the person who had been in the room earlier is Shiyang's niece, and she knows that if she runs into that woman right now, she wouldn't know how to act or what to say. Panicking, she quickly replies to Shiyang that it wouldn't be good if his niece gets the wrong idea. She wishes him good night and says goodbye, feeling the urgency to escape. Without wasting another second, she bolts out of the room as fast as she can, eager to put distance between herself and the awkward situation. A few moments later, a woman enters the room. She is Zheng Shuyi, the actual niece of Shiyang. She looks around and asks, puzzled, how it is already dark outside when she just took a nap starting at noon. Furthermore, she mentions that she heard a woman's voice and questions Shiyang about whether someone came over while she was resting. She stops in her tracks when she notices the expression on his face. She wonders why he's looking at her broodingly, as if she did something wrong. Meanwhile, outside, Shuyi thinks to herself that Shiyang is a weirdo for being able to read outside on such a chilly day. It's a bright new day at the Shi house. Shuyi is complaining to Shiyang about her new job. She really doesn't want to keep it. Meanwhile, Shiyang is sitting quietly, reading a book, and he doesn't seem to pay her any attention. However, she keeps on grumbling and brings up the fact that everyone in their family is working hard to earn money. She argues that at least one person should be able to take a break, especially since they have enough money to last for 3 lifetimes. She adds that she never worked this hard when she was in school. Now, she's stuck doing a 9-to-5 internship just to earn a few thousand yuan each month, and it doesn't seem fair. She pleads with Shiyang to let her postpone her job until next year, thinking that maybe it would be better for her. However, Shiyang simply replies that their family doesn't support freeloaders, and the word hits her like bricks. In the Finance Weekly building, it seems like a regular workday for Shuyi and her colleagues. Nan is holding a piece of paper, her eyes wide with surprise. She just discovered that the editor-in-chief has chosen Shuyi to train a new intern, which is quite a nice surprise. She remarks that the new intern seems to have a lot of potential and a strong academic record. Interestingly, the intern has also gone to the same school as the editor-in-chief, which adds to Nan's excitement. However, Shuyi doesn't seem very impressed. She tells Nan to take another look at the grades and resume. Nan checks again and discovers that the new hire came in second place in a school-wide singing competition and was the president of the cosmetics club, among other things. Shuyi explains that the intern is clearly a Nepo baby who's just having a tough time, so she would rather not get on their bad side. Inside, she feels frustrated because her plate is already full with work and romance. The thought of having to train a spoiled brat on top of everything else feels overwhelming. The new hire arrives and finds Shuyi, then she introduces herself as Zheng Shuyi. As Shuyi prepares to go all out on the final draft of the interview with Shiyang, she decides it's only proper to assign some jobs to the new intern. She gives Shuyi a recording from a recent interview and asks her to organize the material and write a draft based on it. Shuyi feels confident about this assignment, believing it's just a matter of listening to the recording and typing what she hears. She thinks to herself that it shouldn't be too challenging or time-consuming. However, when she opens the file, she discovers that it contains her uncle Shi Yang's interview. As she listens to the recording, she finds it more difficult than she expected. She tries to call out for help, but Shuyi has put in noise-canceling earbuds so she doesn't hear Shiyue's voice. Shiyue keeps calling out, hoping to get Shuyi's attention, but the older woman is focused on her work. She only pauses for a moment to drink her coffee before diving back into her tasks, thoroughly ignoring Shiyue. This frustrates her because she has never experienced being ignored like this before. After a long and busy day at work, Shuyi stretches her arms and decides to see how the new intern is doing. When she looks for Shiyue, she notices that she's already left for the day. Shuyi thinks to herself that the girl must be a neat and organized person who doesn't really enjoy staying late at work. At the Shi's family home, the family is having dinner together, and Shiyue is expressing her frustration. She tells her family that her job is incredibly dull and is making her feel like she might die of boredom. She explains that on her first day at work, her supervisor gave her the task of transcribing a recording. Then she adds that she is a reporter, not someone who just types things. Her mother is curious about her supervisor, so Shiyue mentions that the name is something like Zheng. Her father, Qin Xiaoming, chimes in, asking if her supervisor's name is Zheng Shuyi, and Shiyue is surprised that he knows her. He explains that he has met Shuyi before and thinks she is a good person. He adds that Shiyue could really learn from her. Hearing this, Shiyue looks upset. She says she is eager to learn, but she wonders if her supervisor is willing to teach her. Her father looks puzzled and asks her to clarify what she means. Shiyue glances over at Shi Yang, who has been silent throughout the conversation, as if trying to find support or an answer. She suddenly begins to make a strange singing sound. Shi Yang picks up his phone and says he has finished eating. He wipes his hands with a napkin. Shiyue sees this as a sign and decides to approach her uncle. She tells him that because he introduced her to Finance Weekly, he needs to support her in her endeavors. The next day at work, Shuyi is in a really good mood. Nanan notices this and asks her if something special has happened. Shuyi looks quite put together even though she has been pulling all-nighters. She shares with Nanan that the editor-in-chief liked her final draft, and now she is just waiting for approval from Mingyu. As they are talking, an email notification pops up on Shuyi's screen. It's from Mingyu Bank. She opens the email filled with hope, but her heart drops when she sees the feedback. Not approved. Shuyi looks at the not approved email in shock and disbelief. However, she hypes herself up, saying she will just have to revise it because, after all, a worker's ethics is guaranteeing client satisfaction. So she makes a second draft and sends it. And when the feedback from Mingyu Bank comes in, it still says, not approved. Not giving up, she makes a third draft and sends it, but the feedback comes in again saying, not approved. This time around, Nan notices and points out that none of the feedbacks provide any helpful suggestions. Shuyi appears frustrated as she mentions that this is their first time interviewing Shi Yang, and she never expected him to have such high standards. Curious, Nan asks her if she thinks Shi Yang might be holding a grudge against her. Shuyi considers the question for a moment and replies that she doubts Shi Yang would be that petty. In the background, Shiyue is quietly listening to their conversation, and she can't help but smile to herself. She starts to wonder if her uncle is actually doing this to help her, because after all, he is her uncle, right? At that moment, Shu Yuling makes an appearance. She makes a sarcastic remark, saying, "Didn't Shuyi mention that Shi Yang valued her skills?" But at the moment, it's kind of ironic since Shuyi's story is still stuck in the review stage. With a satisfied smirk on her face, she turns and walks off, clearly pleased with her comment. Shuyi realizes that the deadline is getting closer, and she knows she can't just keep reviewing her work without getting any real feedback. Feeling anxious, she quickly makes her way to the editor-in-chief's office. Once she arrives, she asks the director for Shi Yang's phone number. She tells her that she plans to contact him directly to ask for his input herself. At the Shi's residence, Shi Yang's Rolls-Royce pulls up to a stop, and the driver informs him that they have reached their destination. Outside, he notices Shuyi waiting for him, visibly shivering in the cold. As he steps out of the car, she immediately calls out to him. Without a backward glance, he asks her why she wanted to meet with him today. She quickly racks her brain for an appropriate answer. She still doesn't know how to ask him. Likewise, she wonders if she should just ask him directly if he is unsatisfied with her in some ways. But then she senses that that would be too direct, so instead she says that it seemed like he might have wanted to see her, so she came to find him. He looks at her for a moment in silence. Seeing his expression, Shuyi starts to worry that she might have worded her question poorly. Shi Yang finally responds, asking her how she reached her conclusion and why she feels that way. Inside, Shuyi reminds herself that in moments like this, she needs to be firm and hold her ground. Taking a deep breath, she decides to turn the question around on him. She asks why he keeps sending her story back to her without any suggestions or corrections, and why he has refused to pick up his phone each time she tries to call him. Shi Yang answers simply that he was not satisfied, and Shuyi asks him what exactly he wasn't satisfied with. Taking a confident step closer, she tells him that if he can tell her what the issue is, she will fix it because she believes she can. In her mind, she reminds herself that the deadline is approaching quickly and that she has put in far too much effort to get this feature story right. She decides that she cannot allow herself to fail like that. Gathering her courage, she takes a bold step forward and she asks him if maybe he just wanted to see her. She realizes that she might sound a bit off bunker and might have crossed the line. But what else can she do? Shi Yang turns around and walks away forward. Then he tells Shuyi to come inside with him. She remains still for a moment, clearly taken by surprise, but Shi Yang repeats that she should come along with him. How good could her luck be? Enjoying the recap so far? Comment Shuyi below for part 2. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us a lot. Until next time, ciao.